So, a few years ago, I made a commitment to never drink or do any drugs, which is pretty square since I hadn't already drinking or done any drugs. But the reason for this commitment was because a friend of mine had just gone into alcohol rehab, basically. I had brought her there, and it was terribly rough. There was a period of time where she had asked me to take her, and then I tried to sort of take her wine boxes away from her, and she was just on her hands and knees, just begging for me to leave the wine there. I also worked at a shelter for only about 4 months, but I also worked out on the streets with an organization helping out the homeless in the area for a couple of years. And the whole experience really soured any possibility for me to have a moderate relationship with drugs and alcohol. I also feel on an individual level that I know myself well enough to know that I would not be one of the people with a healthy relationship to it. Like, you totally can have a healthy relationship with at least something mild like alcohol. I couldn't, though, probably. I can't even get myself to brush my teeth. I'm not exactly a good habit-forming individual. And for most of the time that I have helped people who were addicted, it's been through harm reduction coalitions. And these harm reduction coalitions contain kind of a diversity of people, politically speaking. Usually not any like actively right-wing people, but there's like libertarian harm reduction activists, there are liberal harm reduction activists, and there are socialist or anarchist harm reduction activists. And they all just kind of collaborate and work together. And I think maybe this coalition that I've been a part of, I think maybe it's part of the problem to an extent with why we're not solving this problem. On one hand, the basic philosophy of harm reduction has some stuff I agree with, right? If more people who were, say, homeless, had housing, had health care, had stuff like that, maybe they wouldn't be doing drugs so much. Maybe they wouldn't be drinking so much. Sure, I agree with that. I also agree with having like needle exchanges where if you're already doing drugs, it's probably better that they have clean needles, right? It's probably better for their health. The problem, though, I think, with harm reduction as a philosophy, as an ideology, is that it implies that it's all on an equal footing. Doing drugs, drinking, not doing drugs, not drinking, it's all kind of equal. It doesn't really matter what sort of life you choose. It's all up to you. It's also the case that they seem to imply this belief that if you just got everybody freed of their material scarcity, you got rid of the homelessness and you got rid of the poverty, right? If you got rid of that, every single person on the face of the earth would immediately choose to be, if not sober, then responsible with their drugs and their alcohol consumption. And that's not true, right? We've got rich celebrities who go out and they have all the material wealth they could possibly need, and they're very much drinking and doing drugs. And you see this problem in a lot of things too, right? When it comes to obesity, a lot of the left is very comfortable with subsidizing healthy foods, but they're very, very uncomfortable with the proposal to tax junk food. They're uncomfortable with the idea of discouraging any sort of a bad practice like that. And I think the reason behind it is because in their head, the goal is to get all food to be, well, free, probably, right? All food to be on the same level. And if it's all on the same level, then people will naturally choose the healthier over the unhealthy. They trust people, basically. You know, they trust people to make those decisions. And on a fundamental level, I don't, for the obvious reason that people are somewhat irrational. we can form chemical dependencies, and we're not completely trustworthy, especially not when it comes to addiction. Addiction is the edge of freedom, right? Human freedom is maybe great if you're a fully conscious, rational being. Every step you take away from full rationality, from full consciousness, is a step in the direction of needing some sort of a collective body to help or protect you in some way. And addiction is the epitome of people making choices that they don't actually want to make. I think addiction is probably the most damning criticism of liberal philosophy that exists out there. Because the second you know anyone who's addicted to anything, even just your phone screen, you're looking at somebody who is making choices that they probably do not actually want to make. So this harm reduction coalition has been as successful as it has because it combines liberals, libertarians, and socialists. It's kind of it's the stuff that they can all agree on. But the problem is that socialists aren't liberals, they aren't libertarians, and they need to have their own policy. They need to embrace an approach that actually holds these industries accountable for what they're doing, instead of just allowing people to do what they want, right? It's not just about ending the war on drugs. It needs to be about ending the drug market and addiction as well. So there's different policies on different fronts. For alcoholism, right, it's already legal. To some extent, alcohol is already in the ideal state that a lot of these libertarians and liberals want to get other drugs to. And it's still terrible for alcohol. And James Wilt, author of Drinking Up the Revolution, argues that we are not doing a good job holding the alcohol industry accountable, and that the alcohol industry has actively funded political movements that don't hold it accountable. It wants people to embrace this more libertine notion of how to treat alcohol. It wants people to be soured on the idea of doing anything policy-wise to confront it. And so it holds up the legacy of prohibition as if our only options are prohibition or nothing. But there are other options. We can raise the price of alcohol to discourage problem drinking. We can ban alcohol advertisement entirely instead of just having the weird halfway banned version that we have right now. We can do things that absolutely crush the alcohol industry, and we're not. When it comes to heavier drugs, the drug policy approach of the left for the longest while has been based on Portugal's model of decriminalization. But what a lot of people don't know is that Portugal didn't just decriminalize all drugs. They started by decriminalizing all drugs, and then that wasn't working. They were having an expansion of drugs, actually. And when that wasn't working, they decided to create a new program of compulsory rehabilitation for addicts out in public. So it's still largely decriminalized. Nobody is going to jail, but they are taking people who are using and putting them into rehab, kind of whether they want to be or not. And this compulsory drug rehabilitation, paired with an element of decriminalization, is what actually led to the reduction in drug consumption that most harm reduction activists cite in Portugal. It's very frustrating for me as someone whose primary motivation towards left-wing politics was probably mostly things related to addiction. Right, that was probably my primary motivation, was seeing how social media was destroying people's lives and thinking, oh, you know what the problem is that these companies care more about making as much money as possible than they do about all of these people who are addicted to their screens. If that's my primary motivation, and then you join up with the left, and then the left is actively opposed to any policy attempt to restrict the use of our addictive devices at all, then clearly I've been tricked. I've been duped in some way by this movement. the policy that's been spreading recently is a lot of school districts have started banning cell phones on the premises. They do not want smartphones there. And this is partly as a result of the writing of this man, Jonathan Haidt, in his book, The Anxious Generation, and partly a result of people existing in the world and seeing just how bad these devices are and how addictive they are. I think that's a wonderful policy, and I think it's absurd that so many people on the left, the attitude that they have towards it is basically that any attempt at restricting any kind of freedom like this at all is a moral panic. That it's the same as people were panicking about TV in the 80s, or that it's the same as the satanic panic, that it's all a puritanical Christian hatred of pleasure. That's a narrative that comes up. I think that's a massive oversimplification. And let's say it is the same as people freaking out about TV in the 80s. Did we really decide that they were wrong? Did we decide that it was great that everybody watches TV in every minute of their free time? I don't think that was what we decided. I think we just gave up. I think everybody started watching TV in every minute of their free time, and then the reaction to it gave up because it was so addictive that we just let it win. And now it's being used as an example of, oh, well, how is it any different from smartphones? It's not. They're both really bad. I've also, individually, personally, always been really averse to gambling. It's ironic because I think, in a way, as a person, I'm probably more conservative than a lot of the conservatives out there, right? Because regardless of what they might preach ideologically, a lot of these people drink, at the very least. A lot of these people gamble. A lot of these people do all the things that they're trying to restrict people from doing. And I actually, personally, individually don't. I live this, I think, a lot more. And a big part of my reason for being opposed to gambling is because it plays into this irrational part of your mind again. It's rooted in making you think that you actually have a chance. Even though the house always wins, they cover it up in enough flash and pomp and gamification. And as somebody who learned about game design, I find it almost offensive to the design of games, because this is the lowest common denominator of game design. It is not a game. It is addiction with the thin veneer of a game just to trick you into playing it. And I think it's a shame that we've had this, what's called light touch regulation. Rebecca Cassidy, in her book Vicious Games, talks about how the gambling industry collaborated with activists and with politicians to encourage the current state of gambling regulation, which treats you as personally responsible for your gambling. They call it responsible gambling. And they make it sound like it's an ideology of moderation. And I think they think it is, but it places all the responsibility on you as the gambler to learn your own lesson. And there's no responsibility whatsoever for us as a collective society to prevent people from getting these addictions in the first place. And what they've been trying to do is they've been trying to fund programs to help people who are problem addicts, who are already really addicted to gambling, to get out of it. But the problem is that when you get to them at that stage, the harm has already been caused. The thing you need to prevent is the beginning of the addiction. The thing you need to prevent is when they first start to get addicted to gambling. And to do that, you have to actually attack the industry itself and its profit margins at its core, instead of just funding a separate public health program to help addicts after the fact. On some level, I feel very conflicted about this policy and this approach, because on a basic level, I don't believe in blaming people for their addictions. I don't believe in that. And to an extent, a war on drugs sort of politics feels like the political equivalent of blaming people for their addictions. Meanwhile, I also don't believe in allowing these industries to get people addicted. So you have to find some kind of weird middle ground policy that uses authority in a constructive and productive way without excessively violating people's liberties. And it's a very difficult line to walk policy-wise. But I think that the authors cited here and the works in the description of this video do the best job I've seen so far of actually trying to walk that line instead of just giving up and allowing the libertarians to dictate socialist policy.